They put me in handcuffs on my own street, shoved me against the hood of a patrol car hard enough that the side mirror caught my ribs, and held me there while my neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, stood frozen on her porch across the road, her hand pressed flat over her mouth, her eyes wide and helpless in the yellow streetlight. The officer who twisted my arms behind my back did it slowly, deliberately, like he was savoring the mechanics of it. He had no idea who I was. Hours later, 12 badges disappeared from the Ridgewood Police Department, 1 sergeant and 11 officers, and I was the single reason every last one of them was gone. But let me take you back, because if you start at the end, you miss the part that matters. My name is Isaiah Brooks, Special Agent with the FBI Criminal Investigative Division, assigned to the Ridgewood Field Office. Before that, Chicago. Before that, 2 years in Washington that I keep to myself. I was divorced, the father of a young daughter named Layla, who could beat me at chess in under 20 moves and had recently started correcting my grammar. I ran several miles most evenings after dinner. I drove a dark blue Accord that needed new brake pads. I made my coffee too strong and kept it in a thermos on my desk until it tasted like motor oil, which I preferred to the watered-down sludge in the break room. Over a decade with the Bureau had given me good instincts, early gray at the temples, and a bone-deep familiarity with the particular way corruption looks from the inside, the way it smells, the way it moves, the way it always convinces itself it is invisible. The Ridgewood PD Narcotics Unit had been convincing itself of exactly that for years. The investigation started months earlier when a woman named Tamara Graves walked into my office and sat down across from me without being asked. She folded her hands on the edge of my desk like she was settling in for something she had been rehearsing. She ran a community nonprofit on the East Side, Job Training, GEDD, PrEP, a food pantry that served hundreds of families a week. She was small and precise, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the kind of quiet authority that comes from spending decades being the most competent person in every room she entered. She told me without raising her voice that officers from the Ridgewood PD's narcotics unit had been planting drugs. Not once, not in a panic, not as a one-off, but systematically for years. Cash confiscated during raids that never fully appeared in evidence logs. Arrests built on manufactured probable cause. Men and women from her neighborhood, her clients, her neighbors, people she knew by name and by child, who had lost jobs, custody, apartments, years of their lives because someone with a badge decided the paperwork was more important than the truth underneath it. She had names. She had dates. What she did not have was anything a federal court would touch. "That's why I'm here," she said, and looked at me steadily over the rims of those reading glasses. I looked back at her and understood that this was the kind of case that either makes your career or ends it, depending on how clean the people above you are. I told her I would look into it. She nodded once, like she had expected nothing less and nothing more. Then left. Months of wiretaps approved by 2 separate federal judges. Financial records subpoenaed from 4 banks. A confidential informant inside the unit who risked more than I like to think about to keep feeding me information. 17 binders of documentation and a flash drive. 1 flash drive that contained the organized, court-ready case file, everything in order, everything cross-referenced. The U.S. Attorney's Office had reviewed it twice. Assistant U.S. Attorney Nia Okoro had called it, in her precise and measured way, airtight. The arrest warrant meeting was scheduled for the next morning. The night before, I went running. I went running because I always went running. Because after a day of staring at bank statements and listening to wiretap recordings, I needed something that was just my body. and the dark and the cold air and miles of pavement under my feet. I put on a gray hoodie, the one from the Ridgewood Half Marathon years ago, and my oldest Nikes and my earphones, and I tucked my FBI credentials into the small zip pocket of my running jacket out of habit, because I had not left home without them in over a decade. My service weapon was locked in the apartment. I was off duty. I was running. I was 2 blocks from home when the only thing on my mind was whether my left knee was going to give me grief on the uphill stretch near the park. I almost did not notice the patrol car pull alongside me. Almost. It rolled slow, matching my pace for a few seconds, just long enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up before the yellow flashers kicked on. I slowed to a walk, pulled out one earbud. 2 officers climbed out. The passenger, younger, blonde, with that particular coiled quality in his posture, and the driver, older, heavy-set, sergeant stripes on his sleeve, moving like a man who had done this exact sequence before and found it unremarkable. "Hands where I can see them," the younger one said. I stopped, raised both hands, palms out, fingers spread. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "Received a call," the sergeant said, his voice unhurried, almost bored. "Suspicious male matching your description. This block." A call on the block where I had lived for years. I kept my face still. "I live on this street," I said. "I've been running. My apartment is half a block up. Number 44, 2nd floor. ID," the younger officer said. "I have federal credentials in my jacket pocket," I said carefully, slowly, like building something fragile out of very small pieces. "I'm going to reach for them." The younger officer's hand moved to his holster. "Hands stay up." I held his gaze. Somewhere behind my sternum, something clenched. "I need to reach into my pocket to show you my identification." "Hands stay up," he said, and each word landed separately, like a door closing. Looking back now, I know that was the moment I should have understood it was not random. The younger officer's escalation had come too fast. Too clean, too rehearsed, like someone had scripted the conversation in advance and he had memorized his lines. The sergeant's expression was the thing that gave it away. Not hostile, not surprised, but carefully, deliberately neutral. The way a face goes when it is actively suppressing recognition. Standing there on Callaway Street with my hands up and the yellow light pulsing across the wet asphalt, I still told myself it was routine, ugly and infuriating and racially motivated. The same story that had been running for decades, the one I had grown up watching from the back seat of my father's car on the way home from church in Atlanta, my mother's hand finding mine and squeezing cold and tight. I told myself routine. I was wrong. They cuffed me before I could speak again. The sergeant held my left wrist while the younger officer applied the restraints, and neither of them looked at my face while they did it, as if I were an administrative procedure, a box to be checked. The metal caught the bone of my right wrist at an angle, and a sharp, bright line of pain ran up into my shoulder. I held completely still and let it happen because I had exactly enough training to know that the moment I did not hold still, everything got worse, and nothing got better. Mrs. Donnelly was watching from her porch across the street. I could see her in my peripheral vision, the slight figure in her house dress, one hand still pressed to her mouth, the porch light making a soft halo around her white hair. She had baked me banana bread once and kept an eye on my place when I traveled, and knew Layla by name. I watched her make the calculation I would have made in her position. I watched her shoulders drop half an inch, and I did not blame her, not even a little. The door of the patrol car closed behind me with the sound of a bank vault sealing shut. The back seat smelled like synthetic cleaner and old fear. My wrists were pinned behind me at an angle that would leave bruises by morning, and the plastic divider between the seats was close enough to my face that I could see my own reflection, fragmented, distorted, barely recognizable. I breathed in through the nose, 4 counts, out through the mouth, 4 counts. I did not yell. I did not demand. I stared at my own broken reflection, and I breathed, and I thought, because that was the only tool I had left. The sergeant had recognized me, not necessarily my name, maybe not that, but he had recognized me as a problem. I had been in this work long enough to know the difference between a cop who sees a black man in a hoodie and makes a lazy, ugly assumption, and a cop who sees a specific person and decides what happens next. The sergeant's neutrality had been active, performed, and the scripted escalation from the younger officer had been designed not to give me a chance to produce my credentials. I went through my mental files. Ridgewood PD Narcotics Unit, 12 officers, 1 sergeant, and I thought, what are the odds? The odds were not good. Booking took hours. They confiscated my jacket at intake, and with it, everything in the zip pocket. A property clerk with a name tag that read Dante dropped the jacket into a clear plastic bag without looking at what it contained. I told him in the clearest voice I had left that the bag he was sealing contained identification from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He looked at me the way people look at someone speaking a language they have decided not to understand. He sealed the bag. I was charged with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, fingerprinted, photographed under fluorescent lights that made everyone look posthumous, and placed in a holding cell. The cell was a metal bench, a buzzing overhead tube, and a smell of industrial disinfectant that had given up on whatever it was trying to cover. A man was asleep in the far corner with his arm across his face. I sat down. My watch, a basic Casio they had not bothered to take, told me the hour was late. The U.S. Attorney's meeting was hours away. I sat with that number and let it settle into me the way cold water settles into the body, slowly, comprehensively, reaching places you would rather it did not. The backup copies of the case file existed on a secure federal server, accessible to me and to my supervisory agent, Leon Hayes, who was in Atlanta on an unrelated matter and unreachable at that hour without a phone. The physical flash drive was in my property bag on a shelf somewhere in this building, the same institution I was one morning away from dismantling. Someone in that institution knew about the investigation. The question was never whether. The question was how much they knew and how much time they needed to buy. One night might be enough. If that property bag was opened, if someone with access and a bad reason went through the contents, if the flash drive disappeared before the meeting, the case did not collapse. The server copies existed, but the warrants would be delayed. And delayed in this business meant witnesses pressured, evidence shredded, informants burned. I thought about Tamara Graves and her hundreds of families and the men who had been sitting in cells exactly like this one because someone with a badge had decided the truth was optional. I stared at the buzzing light. I gave myself a moment to feel the full weight of it, the indignity of the cuffs, the anger sitting quiet and radioactive in my chest, the cold, specific fear for everyone whose case depended on what happened before dawn. Then I stopped feeling and started working. No phone, no visible credentials, no line to Nia Okoro or Leon Hayes. What I had was a watch, a working memory, over a decade of experience and the knowledge that even the most carefully planned trap has a seam. You just have to find it before the clock runs out. "Officer," I said toward the locked door. My voice was level and unhurried. "I need to speak with the duty supervisor. I'm a federal agent. My identification is in my property bag. I am asking calmly, clearly, for access to a supervisor. That is a right I am entitled to regardless of the charges." Silence. The fluorescent light buzzed. The man in the corner shifted and muttered something that might have been a name. I settled back against the wall and began building the sequence in my head. First step, second step. Who calls whom in what order? What gets said? How fast it moves. The sergeant had taken my credentials and my phone and assumed that left me helpless. What he had not counted on was this. I had spent months building a case against his unit, which meant I knew every piece of his world, and I knew exactly which one would fall first when I pulled the right thread. I had one play. It was thin, but it was mine. The duty supervisor arrived later. I heard the footsteps in the corridor first, unhurried, a single pair. The slow, deliberate walk of someone who had been pulled away from something comfortable and wanted me to know it. The slot in the door opened. The face on the other side belonged to a man I recognized. My whole body went very still. Not from surprise. I had been half expecting something like this because the universe tends to be consistent about how it piles on, but from the effort of not showing it. His name was Sergeant Harlan Voss, Narcotics Unit, with years on the Ridgewood PD. I knew his face from surveillance photos. I knew his cell phone number, his home address, his car registration, and the fact that in recent time he had deposited a significant amount of cash into a personal account in amounts just small enough to avoid automatic reporting flags. He was the third-ranking officer in the unit I was about to dismantle. He was also the duty supervisor for the night shift. He looked at me through the slot. Something moved across his face, a flicker gone in under a second, and then the careful blankness returned. "You wanted to see a supervisor," he said. "I did," I said. I kept my voice the way you keep a hand steady over a candle, absolutely controlled, because the moment it shook was the moment he knew something. "I'm a federal agent. My name is Isaiah Brooks, Special Agent, FBI. My credentials were taken at booking. They are in a property bag with my name on it. I am asking for them to be retrieved and verified." A pause. He was working through something behind his eyes. "Your charge sheet says resisting and disorderly," he said. "Says you refuse to comply with a lawful..." "I know what the charge sheet says," I said, not cutting him off, just saying it the way you say something factual, like the temperature or the time. "I am asking for my property bag. That is a standard booking, right? My name is on the bag. All I am asking is for someone to open it." Another pause. He looked at me for a long moment, and I looked back at him, and we both understood, though neither of us said it, that we knew exactly who the other one was. The question was what he was going to do with that. If he retrieved the bag and confirmed my credentials, he had a federal agent in custody, and a very short window before that. That became someone else's problem. If he did not retrieve the bag, he had a federal agent sitting in a cell making a request that was logged in the duty record, which was itself a document that had its own problems. He was calculating. I watched him calculate. "I'll have someone check on the bag," he said. He closed the slot. The footsteps moved away. I sat back and let out a slow breath through my nose. That was the seam. Not clean, not safe, not resolved, but the seam. He was going to go look at my property bag. And the moment he did, the clock on his side started running too. He had to decide in the coming hour whether to let this play out or escalate it. And escalating it meant producing my flash drive. And producing my flash drive meant touching federal evidence. And touching federal evidence while being one of the 12 names on the warrant I was building meant adding obstruction to a list that was already long enough to end careers. I needed him to be smart enough to be scared. I waited. Later, the slot opened again. Different face this time. Younger. Uncertain. Someone who had the look of a man who had been given a task he did not fully understand. He was holding a clear plastic bag through the slot. My jacket was visible inside. "Sign for it," he said. Pushing a clipboard through, I signed. He passed the bag through the slot closed. I sat with the bag in my lap for a moment before I opened it. My hands were very steady. Inside the jacket, in the zip pocket, my FBI credentials, intact and undamaged. I held them for a few seconds, feeling the familiar weight of the badge. And then I sat up straight on the metal bench, and I breathed, and I thought about what happened next. They had given me my credentials, which meant Voss had made his calculation, and his calculation was to back off. He was scared. He was going to go back to his desk and sit on this and hope it resolved itself before morning, which was the exact wrong move. But it was the move scared people always made. He did not know that I did not need a phone to move this forward. He did not know about Dante, because Dante, the property clerk who had sealed my bag without looking at the contents, had in fact looked. I had watched his eyes drop to the flash drive as he handled the jacket. I had watched him read the label on the drive. It was not blank. I had labeled it in small, neat letters with a designation that meant nothing to civilians and everything to anyone who had spent time near federal law enforcement. FBI-C/Ridgewood/active. He had read it. His hands had paused for exactly 2 seconds before he sealed the bag. He had not been the one to bring the bag to my cell, which meant he had not told Voss what he had seen, which meant Dante was doing his own calculating. I knocked on the cell door. "Officer, I need a phone call. That is a right I am entitled to." It took some time. When the guard came, a young officer I did not recognize who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He walked me to a wall phone in a corridor that smelled like copy toner and old coffee, and I dialed the one number I had memorized for exactly this kind of situation. It rang 3 times. Then, "Yeah, Leon Hayes, my supervisory agent in Atlanta," and from the quality of his voice I could tell I had woken him. "It's Brooks," I said. "Listen carefully." I had seconds before the guard would start getting uncomfortable. I used them. I told Leon where I was and why. I told him about the flash drive and the property bag and Nia. I told him to call Nia Okoro at home. I gave him her personal number from memory and to tell her that the case was potentially compromised and that she needed to access the server copies before morning and have agents at the Ridgewood 1st Precinct soon. I spoke in the clipped, precise shorthand of someone who has worked with the same partner for years and does not need to explain the subtext. "You in a cell right now?" Leon said. "Yes." A pause. And in that pause, I could hear him processing, recalibrating, running through the same sequence I had run through in my cell. Then, "Give me 20 minutes. He clicked off. The guard walked me back. I sat down on the metal bench and looked at my Casio. I had made my move. Now I had to wait, which is always the hardest part. The part where you have done everything you can and the outcome is in someone else's hands. And there is nothing left to do but sit with the buzzing light and the cold bench and the man asleep in the corner. I thought about Tamara Graves. I thought about the files, the names, the dates, the specific documented cases. A young man named Marcus Dells, who had served months for possession of a controlled substance that he had never touched. A woman named Denise Ware, who had lost custody of her 2 children during a trial built on manufactured evidence. I thought about them the way I had thought about them every day for months, not as abstractions, but as weight. The specific, measurable weight of what happened when the people who were supposed to protect you decided you were useful only as a statistic. I did not sleep. I did not try to. Later, the corridor outside my cell became loud. I heard footsteps, multiple sets, fast, and then voices, at least 3, speaking in low, urgent tones that carried the specific energy of authority. Meeting authority, and neither side wanting to be the one to blink first. I sat up straight. The door of the cell opened. The man standing in the doorway was not a Ridgewood officer. He was in a dark jacket with 3 letters across the chest. And behind him were 2 more agents. And behind them, barely visible in the corridor, was the white, stunned face of the night sergeant. "Agent Brooks," said the man in the jacket. "Special Agent Simone Marsh, Ridgewood Field Office. Sorry for the wait." I stood up. My legs were stiff from the bench, and there was a bruise forming on my right wrist in the shape of the cuff's edge, but I was standing, and my credentials were in my hand, and the night was nearly over. "The property bag," I said. "Flash drive inside. I need it verified and secured right now." "Already done," Marsh said. "Okoro called in a judge early. We have it." Something went out of my chest that I had not realized I had been holding for hours. A pressure like the moment before a storm when the air finally breaks. I walked out of the cell. In the corridor, 3 Ridgewood officers stood in a loose, uncertain cluster. The night shift. People who had nothing to do with the arrest, but who were about to have a very complicated morning. I did not look at them. I walked past them toward the exit, and I heard one of them say something to Marsh in a low voice, and I heard her say clearly, and without inflection, "You'll want to call your union rep." I was out of the building before dawn. The sky was that particular shade of pre-dawn gray that does not belong to night or morning, and the air was cold and smelled like wet concrete and car exhaust. I stood on the steps of the Ridgewood 1st Precinct for a moment and breathed it in. Marsh had a car waiting. I got into the back seat and closed my eyes for the short drive to the Federal Building. And when I opened them, the city was starting to show its first lights. Nia Okoro met me in her office with a coffee that was actually good, the real kind from the machine in the executive suite, and dark circles under her eyes that told me she had been awake since Leon called. She was a compact, precise woman in her late 40s who wore her seniority the way good lawyers wear their best suits, quietly, so the quality could speak for itself. She looked at me across her desk and her jaw tightened slightly. "Are you hurt?" she said. "Bruised wrist. Nothing medical. I'm calling the Civil Rights Division." "After," I said. "Warrants first." She looked at me for a moment. Then she turned back to her monitor. The judge signed soon after. 12 warrants, 1 for each officer, 1 for the sergeant. "You want to be there when we serve them?" I thought about Sergeant Voss at his desk, deciding to be scared. I thought about the younger officer with his hand on his holster on Callaway Street. I thought about Dante, who had read the label on the flash drive and made the right choice, even when he did not have to. "Yes," I said. "I want to be there." We arrived at the Ridgewood 1st Precinct later that morning. There were 8 of us, 4 FBI agents, 2 from the Civil Rights Division, Nia, and a deputy U.S. Marshal who had the particular economy of movement that comes from having served a lot of warrants in a lot of places and never once found it surprising. I stayed in the back. I wanted to watch, not lead. This was not the moment for me to be visible. This was the moment for the system, the part of it that worked, the part I had spent months feeding evidence into, to do what it was built to do. The precinct had the queasy morning energy of a place where half the people know something is coming, and the other half do not. He was at his desk when we came through the door. I watched his face from across the room, watched him see us, watched him see me. Watched the color leave his face in one slow, comprehensive drain. He reached for something on his desk, his phone probably, and Marsh was at his side before he got there. "Victor Harlan," she said, "you are under arrest. Please stand up." He stood. He was very pale. He looked across the room at me, and I looked back, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. The warrant said everything that needed to be said. One by one, over the next hour, 11 more officers were taken into custody. Some were in the building. 3 were reached at home. 1 was in his car in the parking lot, engine running like he had been thinking about leaving and had thought about it too long. I stood near the door and watched each one come through the process, the reading of rights, the cuffs, the same mechanics that had been applied to me on Calloway Street hours earlier, and I kept my face neutral, not triumphant, not cold, just present. Witness to the thing I had built for months coming apart into its component pieces. The younger officer, the one with the blonde hair and the scripted escalation, was the last one brought in. He was off duty, reached at his apartment some distance away. When they walked him through the precinct lobby, he saw me and he stopped walking for just a second before the marshal moved him forward. His face was different from Voss's. Voss had been calculating right up until the moment he was cuffed. This one just looked young, younger than I had registered in the yellow light of Calloway Street, standing there in his off-duty clothes with handcuffs on his wrists and the particular stunned expression of someone who had made a very large bet and only now, watching the cards turn over, understood what he had wagered. I did not feel sorry for him. I felt something more complicated than that, something that would take me a long time and probably a few conversations with a very patient therapist to name properly. But I filed it away for later. There was still work to do. Nia was at my elbow. 12 for 12, she said quietly. Press will have it by midday. Good, I said. Carter. She paused. The civil rights complaint for what happened to you last night. That has to be filed. I know. I looked at her. I'll file it, but I want Tamara Graves to hear about this before it hits the news. She started this. She should know it is done. Nia looked at me for a moment. Then she said, I'll give you an hour. I called Tamara from a borrowed phone, standing in the parking lot of the Federal Building with the morning sun cutting long, flat shadows across the asphalt. She picked up on the second ring. And when I told her quietly, without drama, just the facts, 12 arrests, warrants signed, cases being reviewed, there was a silence on her end that was different from every other kind of silence I had heard that night. Not the silence of shock or calculation or suppressed panic, just stillness. The silence of something that has been carrying weight for a long time, setting it down. All 12, she said. All 12. Another pause, then very softly. Thank you, Agent Brooks. Thank Tamara Graves, I said. She walked into my office months ago. She laughed. A short, surprised sound. The kind that comes out of you when something is both sad and funny at exactly the same time. Then she said she had work to do, and she hung up. Months later, the trials began. Sergeant Voss pled out, taking the lesser charge in exchange for testimony against 2 officers who had run the cash redistribution scheme. 8 of the 12 were convicted. 3 took plea deals. 1 case is still pending as of this telling. A federal judge ordered the Ridgewood PD to conduct an independent review of every drug arrest made by the narcotics unit in the previous years. Dozens of cases were identified for re-examination. Several convictions were overturned. Marcus Dells walked out of a correctional facility one morning, his mother waiting for him in the parking lot. And I know this because Tamara Graves sent me a photograph. He was squinting in the sunlight and she had her arms around him, and they were both crying. I did not go back to running on Calloway Street right away. I took a different route for a while. Longer. Through the park. Past the reservoir. Less direct. Partly because of the knee, which had finally decided it was done tolerating the uphill stretch, mostly because I needed the streets to be different for a while. I needed to choose them again, deliberately, rather than just be in them by default. I went back on a Sunday morning in winter. Cold morning, clear sky, the kind of light that makes everything look precise and clean. I ran the same route, past the park, down Callaway, past the building with the squeaky stairs and the drunk drummer radiator, past the streetlight where the patrol car had pulled up alongside me. Mrs. Donnelly was in her yard as I went by, gloves on, pruning something that was still mostly dormant in the winter ground. She looked up. She looked at me for a moment. "Morning, Agent Brooks," she said. "Morning, Mrs. Donnelly," I said. I ran the last block home, and the coffee I made afterward was exactly as strong as it always was, and I stood in the kitchen with my thermos and the radio low and the morning coming through the window. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in the apartment felt like mine. Not an absence, a presence, something I had chosen and kept and earned. Layla called that afternoon. She had seen something about the case on the news at her mother's house. "Dad," she said with a particular tone she had developed lately, 12 years old, and already somehow both younger and older than that, depending on the hour. "Were you really in jail for hours?" I said yes. A pause, then, "Did you win?" I looked at the Casio on my wrist, the same watch they had not bothered to take. "Yeah," I said. "I won." "Cool," she said in the voice that meant she thought it was more than cool, but was not going to give me the satisfaction. And then she told me she had beaten her friend at chess in few moves. And I told her that was better than she had ever done against me. And she told me she was working on it. We talked for some time. After I hung up, I sat for a while in the good quiet of the apartment. The radio off this time, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the city getting on with its day. The coffee was still hot. For the first time in a long time, I did not need it to get through anything. I just wanted it. I drank it anyway.